I'm Vienna Sinclair, Arsha, standing outside the heavy oak doors of my father's study in our Hamptons estate. Clutching a rare orchid I spent 2 years growing just for him. Tonight is his big campaign gala. And for once, I feel ready. Dress pressed. Peace offering prepared. Dad, I think you're going to love this. I whisper, reaching for the brass knob, completely unaware that on the other side, he's already planning my destruction. I stood outside the heavy oak doors of my father's study, holding a rare ghost orchid I had spent 2 years coaxing into bloom. It was supposed to be a peace offering. Instead, it became a goodbye. Through the crack in the door, I didn't just hear their betrayal, I saw it. Propped against his mahogany desk was a campaign poster, covered by a thin sheet that had slipped just enough to reveal my face. But it wasn't me. It was a digitally aged, gray-skinned version of me, looking broken and destitute. Above my head, the slogan read in bold red letters, "She failed. America won't. My mother, Lenore," laughed, the sound of clinking ice against glass echoing in the room. She told my brother to make sure the lighting on stage was harsh so I would look even more pathetic to the suburban female demographic. They weren't planning a family reunion. They were planning a political theater. And I was just the prop. I didn't storm in. I didn't drop the pot. I walked silently to the hall table, placed the orchid right next to the campaign ledger I had swiped earlier, and walked out the front door. I walked out of that house without making a sound. But before I tell you what they did when they realized their prop was missing, drop a comment. Have you ever felt like your family only loved the version of you that was useful to them? Let me know where you're watching from. I didn't run to my car. I walked. Panic is for people who don't have a plan. And for the first time in my life, I had a strategy. I slid into the driver's seat of my sedan, the leather cold against my legs. I placed the key in the ignition but didn't turn it. I took 3 seconds to breathe. In. Out. Then, I engaged the lock. My phone lit up on the passenger seat. Mom. Then Preston. Then Dad. The screen flashed with frantic texts. Not because they were worried about my safety, but because the stylist had arrived and the prop was missing. They needed me in the chair for hair and makeup to complete the transformation into the failed daughter. I didn't block them yet. That would be emotional. This needed to be surgical. I typed one reply to the family group chat. The gift is on the desk. Read the care instructions. I hit send, tossed the phone onto the passenger seat, and turned the ignition. The engine purred. A steady, reliable sound in the chaotic silence of the Hamptons. As I drove through the iron gates, watching the estate shrink in the rearview mirror, the gravity of what I had just seen settled in. For 29 years, I thought I was the disappointment, the quiet one, the one who preferred plants to polling numbers. My father, Senator William Sinclair, and my mother, Lenore, had built a dynasty on image. To them, silence was a defect. They treated my quiet nature like a political liability, something to be managed and hidden away. But tonight, I realized my silence wasn't a defect to them anymore. It was an asset. They had monetized my perceived failure. They needed a story of a struggling, broken child to soften the senator's cold, elitist image. They needed me to be weak so he could look strong. They had built an entire campaign strategy around my incompetence, assuming that because I didn't scream for attention, I had nothing to say. They mistook observation for stupidity. I merged onto the highway, heading back toward the city. The lights of the other cars blurred into streaks of red and white. I wasn't crying. Tears imply a loss. And I hadn't lost anything tonight. I had shed a liability. I wasn't the fragile girl they mocked in that study. I was Vienna Sinclair. And what they didn't know What they had never bothered to ask was that I wasn't failing. I was building. And the care instructions I left on that desk weren't for the orchid. They were for the bomb I was about to detonate in their lives. My sanctuary didn't look like much from the street, an industrial building in the Navy Yard with rusted siding. But the elevator ride to the roof changed everything. I keyed in the security code, and the heavy steel door hissed open, releasing a wave of warm, humid air scented with jasmine and damp earth. I stepped into the glass-walled greenhouse that served as my studio. The city lights of D.C. twinkled in the distance, cold and distant. But in here, life was vibrant and breathing. This was my world. I walked down the rows of drafting tables, running my fingers over the blueprints for the Midtown Revitalization Project. My family thought I played with flowers. They thought I was a gardener. They didn't know I was a landscape architect. And I wasn't just planting seeds, I was designing the lungs of the city. I stopped at my main desk, the monitors humming to life. For years, I had stayed silent. I had let them interrupt me at dinner. I had let Preston explain simple concepts to me as if I were a child. I had let my mother critique my little hobby. Why? Because, in a political dynasty like the Sinclairs, silence is the only place you can hide your true self until it is strong enough to survive. It's the cost of the golden cage. You pay for your safety with your voice. Until the day you realize the cage isn't protecting you, it's harvesting you. I opened my secure email server. There it was, sitting at the top of the inbox. Bold and undeniable. Commission confirmation for the City Central Park project. Phase 1, payment approved. I clicked the attachment. The contract sum stared back at me. $250,000. I let out a breath I felt like I'd been holding since I was 12. My father and Preston had charts showing I made $35,000 a year. They thought I needed their charity, their pity, their $10,000 check handed over on a stage like a bone to a dog. The reality was sitting right here on my screen. I had just out-earned my brother's annual salary in a single contract. I wasn't a charity case. I was their competition. And they had absolutely no idea. I picked up my phone and dialed Sasha. She picked up on the first ring. No. Hello. Just business. Tell me you're safe. I'm safe, I said, my voice steady. And I have something for you. 20 minutes later, the freight elevator dinged, and Sasha walked into the greenhouse. She looked out of place among the ferns in her sharp blazer and combat boots. But her eyes were already scanning the room. Assessing. Calculating. She wasn't just my college roommate, she was the lead investigative journalist for the Post. And she had been trying to pin down my father's financial irregularities for months. Show me, she said, setting her laptop on my drafting table. I pulled up the photo I had snapped in the study. It wasn't just the poster. It was the open ledger sitting next to it. The one my mother had been too arrogant to close. The pages detailed the Sinclair Family Charity Fund, a nonprofit supposedly dedicated to at-risk youth. The fund my parents claimed was supporting me. Sasha zoomed in on the image, her fingers flying across her keyboard as she cross-referenced the account numbers. Here it is, she muttered. Withdrawals. $50,000 for consulting fees to a shell company in the Caymans. $20,000 for venue rental, that's the Hamptons estate. They're paying themselves rent, with charity money. And the check, I added, pointing to the line item dated for today. $10,000. Grant for struggling artist, Vienna Sinclair. Sasha looked up, her expression a mix of horror and triumph. They're using you to launder the money. They gift you the check publicly to make the fund look legitimate, then write it off as a charitable donation. It's wire fraud. Vienna. And because you never actually receive the money since they manage your finances, it goes right back into their pockets. It wasn't just cruelty. It was a crime. My father wasn't just a bad parent, he was a thief. and he was using his own daughter as the face of his larceny. "Can we use this?" I asked. Sasha grinned. A sharp, dangerous look. "Oh. We're not just going to use it. We're going to launch it. I have the article ready. I just needed the smoking gun. This photo is the bullet." She turned her laptop screen toward me. "The gala starts in 2 hours. When he mentions the fund, we drop the story. It will go live on every major newsfeed in the city." I looked at the screen. At the headline drafted in bold, "The Sinclair Fraud. How a Senator Uses His Daughter as a Tax Shelter." "Do it," I said. I opened my laptop and pulled up the gala livestream. The ballroom at the Hamptons estate was a sea of black ties and designer gowns. The camera panned over the tables, lingering on the centerpieces. The champagne towers. The sheer opulence bought with stolen money. My parents stood near the entrance, shaking hands, smiling that practiced. Political smile. Lenore looked radiant in emerald green, her hand resting possessively on my father's arm. They looked perfect, untouchable, and there, right on the podium next to the microphone, was my orchid. They hadn't thrown it out. They had put it center stage. They thought it was a lovely, exotic prop, a symbol of my contrition. I watched as Preston adjusted the microphone. Glancing at his watch, they were annoyed I was late. But they weren't panicked. Why? Because of the narcissist's blind spot. They believed their own narrative so completely that they couldn't conceive of a reality where I didn't show up. In their minds, I was the struggling artist who needed that $10,000 check to pay rent. They thought I was desperate. They thought I was weak. They saw me as an extension of themselves, a limb that might be numb, but would never detach. They assumed I was in the bathroom, or stuck in traffic, or crying in the hallway. It never occurred to them that the furniture might have its own agenda. "They're starting," Sasha said from beside me, her finger hovering over the publish key. On screen, the lights dimmed. A spotlight hit the podium. My father stepped up, looking solemn and statesmanlike. He gripped the sides of the lectern, his eyes scanning the room, likely looking for me in the shadows. When he didn't see me, he didn't stop. He improvised. "My friends," he began, his voice thick with manufactured emotion. "Tonight is a celebration, but it is also a night of truth. As many of you know, my family has been facing a private struggle." I watched, cold and detached, as he prepared to sell my dignity for a polling bump. He had no idea he was standing on a trapdoor. Time didn't just slow down, it stopped. On my laptop screen, the gala felt like a tableau painting. Every detail, crisp and frozen in high definition. I could see the condensation on the champagne flutes. I could see the expectant, pitying looks on the faces of the donors. I could see the way my mother, Lenore, dabbed at a dry eye with a lace handkerchief, performing grief for a daughter who was alive and thriving 20 miles away. My father gripped the podium. The room was silent, hanging on his every word. He loved this silence. He thought it was respect. He didn't know it was the deep breath before the scream. "Vienna has always been delicate," he said, his voice dropping to a somber register that I knew he practiced in the mirror. "We have tried to shelter her. We have tried to support her artistic dreams. But the reality is harsh. She is struggling. She is lost." He paused for effect. A ripple of sympathetic murmurs moved through the crowd. "But tonight," he continued, his voice swelling with patriotic resolve, "we are not hiding from that struggle. We are embracing it. This orchid," he gestured to the ghost orchid sitting innocently on the table beside him, "is the only thing she has managed to grow in 2 years. It is fragile. It needs constant support. Just like her." I felt Sasha tense beside me. He didn't just say that. "Wait," I said, my eyes fixed on the screen. He's walking right into it. My father picked up the small card attached to the vase. The card I had printed on heavy, cream-colored stock. The card that said care instructions in elegant calligraphy, with a large, bold QR code underneath. In honor of my daughter, he announced, holding the card up to the light. We are launching the Vienna Initiative for at-risk youth. If you scan this code, you will be taken to a donation page. Your generosity will help us save young people who, like Vienna, cannot save themselves. He smiled. It was the smile of a man who believes he has won. Please, he urged, take out your phones. Scan the code. Help us turn failure into hope. It happened in waves. First, the movement. 300 wealthy guests reached into their tuxedos and clutches. 300 screens lit up the dim ballroom like fireflies. Then, the beep, the soft, digital chime of cameras recognizing a code. Then, the silence. It wasn't the respectful silence of before. This was different. It was the confused, heavy silence of a room trying to process a contradiction. I watched a woman in the front row, a major donor, frown at her phone. She swiped down. Her eyes widened. She looked up at my father, then back at her phone, her mouth opening in a small O of shock. On their screens, they weren't seeing a donation page for at-risk youth. They were looking at Sasha's article, live on the Post's homepage. The headline was formatted in stark, unforgiving black text: the Sinclair fraud. Senator diverted $1.2 million of charity funds to offshore accounts. Below the headline was a breakdown of the Vienna Initiative, a shell fund used to pay for the very catering they were eating. The yacht, docking fees, in the Caymans. And the designer gown my mother was currently wearing. Something's wrong, Preston whispered to my mother. I saw him tap his earpiece, his eyes darting around the room. The murmur started. A low, buzzing sound that grew louder by the second. Is the link working? My father asked, his smile faltering just a fraction. It should be a direct link. Oh, it's direct, Sasha whispered. Her fingers hovered over her keyboard. Ready for the visual aid? Execute, I said. Sasha hit enter. Behind my father, the massive projection screen that had been displaying the She Failed campaign poster flickered. The image of my sad, gray face distorted, tore apart, and vanished. In its place, 2 documents appeared, projected 10 feet tall. On the left, the contract. Client, Department of Urban Planning. Project, City Central Park Revitalization. Lead architect, Vienna Sinclair. Fee, $250,000. Status, paid in full. On the right, the ledger. Account, Sinclair Charity Fund. Withdrawal, $10,000. Memo, prop check for gala. Vienna. Withdrawal, $45,000. Memo, Lenore. Paris shopping spree. The gasp that tore through the room was visceral. It wasn't a murmur anymore. It was a roar. My father turned. He saw the light changing on the faces of the crowd from pity to horror to hunger. He followed their gaze. He turned around and looked up at the screen. I watched the blood drain from his face in real time. It was a physiological collapse. His posture, usually so erect and commanding, crumpled. He looked at the contract, proving I was a success. He looked at the ledger, proving he was a thief. The contrast was absolute. There was no spin that could survive those 2 images side by side. Flashbulbs began to pop. Not the polite, staged photography of a gala, but the frantic, aggressive flashes of press photographers, smelling blood. They surged forward, ignoring the velvet ropes. Senator, is it true you embezzled the charity funds? Senator, does your daughter know you framed her? Senator, is this your handwriting on the ledger? My mother stood up, knocking her chair over. She reached for Preston, but he was already backing away, pulling his phone out, likely calling a lawyer or a fixer. She looked at the camera, her eyes wild, searching for someone to blame, someone to control, but there was no one. I wasn't there. My father stood alone at the podium, trapped in the spotlight he had demanded. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. The architect of silence had finally run out of words. I watched for 10 more seconds. I watched the security guards try to block the cameras. I watched the donors stand up and walk out, leaving their checkbooks closed on the tables. I watched the empire my family had built on appearances dissolve under the weight of a single, undeniable truth. We're done, I said to Sasha. I reached out and closed the laptop. The screen went black. The room went quiet. The only sound was the hum of the ventilation system in my greenhouse, keeping my plants alive, keeping my world growing while theirs burned to the ground. Sasha closed her laptop, severing the connection to the chaos we had just unleashed. The screen went black, but my phone instantly lit up. It vibrated against the metal table, a frantic, buzzing insect. Mom, Dad, Preston, even Bianca, the PR strategist who had never deigned to speak to me directly. They were calling, texting, likely screaming into their voicemails. I didn't feel a spike of adrenaline. I didn't feel the urge to answer and explain myself. I felt the cold, clean sensation of a contract expiring. I picked up the phone. I didn't read the messages. I didn't listen to the pleas or the threats. I simply executed the digital guillotine. Block, block, block. One by one. I severed the lines of communication until the phone went silent. Then, I drafted one final message to their family lawyer, copying my own legal counsel. I am not a prop. I am the architect. Any further use of my name or image for political gain will result in the release of the full financial records dating back 5 years. Do not contact me again. I walked through the rows of my greenhouse, the humid air settling on my skin. For years, I thought revenge had to be loud. I thought it had to look like a fight. But as I touched the leaves of a monstera, I realized the truth. My success is the ultimate guillotine. They wanted a failure to parade around. They wanted a broken daughter to make them look like saviors. By simply existing as a success, by being wealthy, capable, and independent, I destroyed their narrative more effectively than any scream ever could. My happiness is the blade that severed their reputation. To a narcissist, the victim's joy is the ultimate insult. And I intended to be insultingly happy for the rest of my life. 6 months later, I stood in the center of the city Central Park. The construction fences were down. The air smelled of fresh mulch and blooming jasmine. Around me, families were walking on the paths I had drawn. Children were playing under the canopy of trees I had selected. It wasn't a poster. It wasn't a speech. It was real. It was a living, breathing sanctuary in the middle of a concrete city. I checked my phone briefly. The news alert was still in the sidebar. Former Senator Sinclair resigns amidst ongoing embezzlement investigation. He had lost his seat, his reputation, and his leverage. Lenore was in the Hamptons, reportedly selling off assets to pay legal fees. They were trapped in the wreckage of their own lies. I put the phone away. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the oxygen my plants were creating. I was no longer the girl hiding in the study. I was the architect of life. They tried to bury me, but they forgot I was a seed. If you're growing in the dark right now, keep going. Your bloom will be their reckoning. Share this if you're building a life they can't touch.